Very good evening, dear friends. Welcome to Facebook Live Challenge. This is the 28th edition of Facebook Live Challenge. We have started during the Corona times where the workload was low and we have enough time. And that time, the frequency of Facebook Live Challenge was a bit more. We were doing two or three challenges in a week, but since next week, now the work is also picking up. So from next week, it will be one Facebook Live challenge per week, and we had some really wonderful speakers throughout this challenge who have spoken on various topics ranging from the low flow anesthesia by Vidya Madam to the latest to the last topic, that is the 27th edition on the induction strategies for difficult airway in kids by Dr. Kalyani Patil. And continuing on for this 28th challenge, we have Dr. Abhijit Nair with us today. Dr. Abhijit Nair is consultant anesthesiologist at Indo-American Cancer Hospital, Hyderabad. He has around 88 PubMed indexed publications to his credit and more than 250 citations on Google Scholar. His main area of interest is acute pain, regional anesthesia, perioperative medicine, onco anesthesia, and medical writing. So, Dr. Abhijit is going to speak on two of his dearest topics, regional anesthesia and medical research. Thank you, Dr. Abhijit. Over to you.
Yeah. Good evening to all teachers and friends who are online right now. I thank Dr. Hetal Vadera sir and Dr. Nilesh for facilitating this topic in Facebook Live. This topic is very close to me, especially the writing part, and as Dr. Nilesh rightly said, regional anesthesia and writing. So I just want to share my thoughts how we can, how one can utilize the practice of regional anesthesia by meticulous documentation, data collection, and subsequent publishing. So let's begin from here. So a little about me, Dr. Nilesh has already spoken in my introduction, so I would just skip this slide here right now. So coming to the most important question, like why to publish? Well, there are many reasons why clinician wants to publish. What I can understand is most commonly it is to enhance his or her curriculum writing, to have publications in his or her name. It also helps in promotion at the place of work, especially in the government sector. It helps in relocation, because if somebody from India or some other Asian country is relocating to a European country or a Middle East country or Australia, for example, so what they are asked is what is their how much they have done research. So in that case, even that is important. I remember many of my close friends and all who had contacted me, like requesting me to suggest something, or maybe if possible include name somewhere so that they can make the necessary applications. It might application for grant might not be very much helpful in our country, because but in the European countries and all, if you have a publication history, you have been involved in research or some kind of your footprint is on the database, say PubMed or Scopus database, you can actually apply for grants, and then that can you can do high-end research also. And in corporate setups, especially in India, that's how actually, to be very frank, I also got started writing and all. It was for appraisals basically. At the end of the year or the financial year, the head of the department gives you a form and asks you to fill it what you have done in the field, any presentation and publication. So a decade back, there used to be a big blank, and later on when and I explored that area and I started developing interest. So now I most of the time, if I am asked to write, that space is insufficient because I have lot of work that I can write or print over there. Now coming to another question, why do clinicians don't publish? Yes, laziness. I can guarantee many of would agree with me on this. Not trained. By not training, I mean there's it's not medical writing is not like we write our thesis or we write in magazines and all. There is a dedicated way. There is a proper way of writing, and most of them are not trained. Many of us might think, why do we need to publish? I can do any case, ASA 3, 4, 5. I can have good perioperative outcomes. How is it going to help? Well, in their situation, it might be correct also. But the common excuse that I see from most of my seniors, juniors, and contemporaries are that we are very busy. We can't sit and write. Come on, I don't agree that. Some of them might feel there are no career gains, especially in India. In corporate, at the end of the year, you get a hike in terms of percentages. So whether you do anything or you don't do anything, it doesn't matter. So the same answer: why should we publish? And having said that, somebody who is really interested in having a footprint in the medical database, they usually don't get any acknowledgement. Neither are they provided any academic time or academic off, as it is called in European countries. In Canada, US, and some of the European countries that I know, the weekend is supposed to be academic off. The clinicians are given a choice whether you want to work on the weekends or you want to use it for academic time. So somebody who is not interested in writing or gathering databases, they do cases and they take home more money than the person who are academically oriented. I mean, I can say this confidently because many of my friends that I know, they have told me this. However, there are certain alarming issues. Now, this is a live presentation. I can't ask the audiences to raise their hands whether you were trained or taught how to write your thesis and all. But I am sure most of us are not. Many of them are, as I remember, and as I have seen, my junior also, what they are told us: take an old thesis, printed thesis, go through it, follow the same strategy, collect as many as bibliography you can, and start writing. So many of the times, if the topic is similar, the entire text also you will see similar, except for the demographic data. So coming to teachers in this group who are postgraduate guides or co-guides and all, my question would be: do you ask your students how to write? Do you teach your student how to write a thesis or a research paper systematically, or you just ask them to go to the see the thesis of the previous student and start writing accordingly? Now the next question would be: is anyone aware about any courses or workshops which are available in our country? Well, I would just, because I thank Dr. Ketal because he told me that there's no time limit. Otherwise, I have a habit of speaking very fast. I try to finish at least 2 to 3 minutes before the stipulated time, but I am a bit slow here because I have been granted time of at least 1 hour, so I will go a bit slow. Medical Council of India, as you can see here, they have made it compulsory, the online research methodology course that every student is supposed to do, especially by the end of their second semester. And they have also made it compulsory for the faculty, if they don't have any prior formal training in research, to complete this online course. So Government of India is actually, the Medical Council of India is actually addressing this issue. Coming to training and workshops, Indian Society of Anesthesiology, every ISAME, they have a research methodology workshop. So this year 2020, I was looking in the website of Ahmedabad ISACON, but I couldn't get any workshop details. So this is from the 2019 Bangalore. That's why you see over here, there's a research methodology workshop which is conducted by Devatya sir, Balabhaskar sir, Dr. Rakesh Garg, and many of the excellent researchers in anesthesiology in this country. So coming to the writing part, so why should we write? Well, Francis Bacon had said once, reading maketh a full man, conference a ready man, but writing Exactly, man. I totally agree with you. And Faraday was a bit more aggressive in this. What he used to say is, do your work, finish your work, and publish your work. So I actually believe this dictum. If there is anything I can contribute to the literature, little it could be a single case, it could be a case series, it could be a randomized story, whatever possible from my side. I try to do it. I might not be successful every time, but I make a conscious attempt whenever possible. So publish or perish is something we keep hearing it. I am not in a medical college, but I believe this is something which is quite told to the upcoming assistant professors and associate professors or lecturers, as it is called. You publish or you perish. So the terminology was coined in 1932 by Archibald Cary Coolidge. So this was a book titled Life and Letters, where this terminology was coined, and it is still used till date. So the idea is you publish in literature, you get yourself a name, and then you enhance your career in that particular specialty or subspecialty. So there are certain pertinent questions that you should answer if you want to start writing. First thing is, why do you want to write a paper? What do you want to say? Is there anything that is really new or really interesting? So is it worth writing? Is it worth writing? What I mean is, if you have done a case and there are n number of cases done similarly or a little bit differently earlier, what is the point in writing? So coming to that, has that information been published already? And what format it should be? Format in the sense, either it should be a brief communication, it could be a letter to the editor, it could be an image of interest. So it has to be drafted in a particular format so that it fits a particular word count. Who are the readers? You are a perioperative physician. You would not like to write in an obs gynae or an orthopedic journal. So an anesthesiologist should stick to anesthesia journal or a subspecialty journal. For example, cardiac anesthesia, renal anesthesia, obstetric anesthesia, etc. So the selection of journal is of utmost importance in such situation. So this is a book which is available in all like Amazon everywhere. Even you can buy it online also. What they didn't teach you at school, and whatever why I am showing this is, I can confidently say that they have not taught us how to write, how to do the medical writing person. I was not taught, and I am sure most of us were not taught. But I expect, or rather, I request the current teachers to teach their upcoming students, at least if they can't teach, guide them how to do it, what are the sources available, and how they can really have a successful publishing career ahead. So this is a triangle, this is a diagram showing from the bottom to the top how publications are. It could be an expert opinion in the form of current ideas or editorials, case report, case series, longitudinal studies, case control studies, cohort studies, RCTs, and systematic review and meta-analysis is at the top of the graph because that carries a very high weightage. So in this particular session, which I have been, or which I have agreed to do, I will not be talking about original research or research article, because we all know a randomized control trial, you need 2 groups or 3 groups, you have a hypothesis, you calculate the sample size, you draft your methodology, and then you use appropriate statistical tests and come to a conclusion. That is very clear, as it is in perioperative medicine, in any other specialty of anesthesia, it is the same here also. But I would like to concentrate on other topics where you can write, like short communication, case report, case series, images of interest, etc. So that is how that is what I want to emphasize in this particular talk. So again, original study I won't be touching on. Editorial is usually at the discretion of the editorial board. Review article, there are like several types in which you write a review article. It could be a narrative review where you gather all the references, make tables, and write an elaborate discussion and come to a conclusion. But there is something called a systematic review where you follow the Prisma guidelines. There is a meta-analysis where you follow the Prospero guidelines. So that is also, most of the time it is at the discretion of the editorial board. You take a lot of efforts in writing and submitting, but the editor writes back to you saying that it is on invitation. But there are really certain good journals available all over the world, like Korean journals are there, then Minerva, anesthesiological from Italy, where they just ask us to send a proposal, and most of the time they agree, and they are happy to review rather than just kicking the manuscript back to the author saying that we have not invited to review. So brief communication is something which is like a type of paper which is accepted in Indian Journal of Anesthesia also, where it could be a case series or it could be a pilot study kind of thing, series of 10 cases in each group, where it is what I would say is a hypothesis generation study kind of thing, or it could be a case series per se. Letter to editor, it could be of two types basically. Letter to editor, it is either you write on a published paper, it could be an original article or a brief communication where you point out certain areas where which the authors have not covered or which they have missed or which you feel they have not done justice to. And if the editor or the reviewers think your point is valid, they would definitely agree and they would definitely publish it. And in fact, to the extent that they would ask the original authors to uh, comment to answer the letter written by so and so author. Most of the time, that is not taken very positively by the authors against whom you write a letter to, but that should not stop you, because in another way you are also contributing to the literature. Nowadays, most of the journals, IJA, JOACP, South Journal of Anesthesia, all of them are like inviting, all of them are asking the authors to convert the case report into a letter to editor. What happens is the word count reduces, the number of references reduces, number of metadata or the image or the table that you prepare for a case report, it is also reduced. But that is still, I would say, that is not a bad idea, because even then letter to editor also has a weightage if there is a new message in that. You have a fair amount of a chance to get cited subsequently. Image of interest is something which is very important. Very interesting in the sense you get an interesting image. It could be a fracture, it could be an ultrasound image, it could be a CT image where you can write 200, 300 words. And many good journals all over the world, like good index journal, they accept these kind of communications. And I would show you a few examples. Like subsequently, some 20 to 30 slides would be examples, and I'm sorry to say that for the sake of showing most of the examples would feature my name also. I mean, that was not done consciously, but what I wanted to highlight was that, yeah, if somebody like me can do it, you guys who are sharing such wonderful case reports and case discussions in the task group, why you can't do that? So that is the idea why I have displayed my papers which have been published. Having said that, it's not that I haven't displayed other authors also. I have done that also when I don't have a particular publication. Coming to regional anesthesia per se, which is today's topic basically. So there are a lot of options. I would say among the subspecialty of anesthesia, regional anesthesia has so many varieties other than original article or RCT, randomized controlled trial, where you can write. You can write report series. You can write on new technique. You can write on feasibility study. Feasibility study is a new approach or a new concentration of a drug which you are using, and you are testing its efficacy, its safety compared to the established standard of care. A new drug of late, some new local anesthetic comes recently. HTX 011, which we have also written in Saudi Journal of Anesthesia, has come. Then there is lacosamide bupivacaine, which is like almost a decade old but has not yet featured in India. You can use different doses, concentration, and compare it with the previous published paper where they have used a different concentration, and that becomes your paper. Newer approach. There are a lot of examples of newer approach which I will show you in the subsequent slides. Images are basically not letter to editor or case report. Image is something unusual which you see when you write on that. It need not be how you manage that case, but it should be like how it is important and what are the points that need to be addressed when you see a particular image. Complication and adverse event, what I have seen is many clinicians, they are a bit skeptical to report basically. Maybe what might be in their mind is like people will know that this happened, but then what they don't realize it is that if unless they report it and others know that this is something that can happen and this is how they have managed the case, you actually give them you show them a new way how to handle a complication on an adverse event. So I would request everyone, anybody who discusses a complication on an adverse event, right, make a short write up and plan to submit it. It would be nice, and you will get a lot of thumbs up also, and all the readers would get a new message or something new to learn. Contrast studies are something which is very unique in regional anesthesia, where a radiopaque contrast is injected and an MRI or a CT studies are conducted basically. Cadaveric studies are of utmost importance, especially to know how a drug spreads basically. I mean, most of the studies, if you see, is a combination of contrast studies and cadaveric studies just to understand how a block works, how long the local anesthetic or the injected spreads. Audits are very important. Like audit is usually done in most of the hospital as a part of NABH, but none of the audits are reported. None of the audits are published. I don't know what is the reason. Possibly the reason is that there is some shortcoming. Let it be. You publish a shortcoming this year, you implement those shortcomings and add to that, and next year you publish that. How you have improved on that? You have two papers, one in 2020, one in 2021. Comments on published articles are what that was I was telling, letter to editor. Many people think letter to editor has a very less priority, very least priority, but I would totally, I would disagree to that. I will speak to it, speak about it in the subsequent slide. This is what I was talking about, the feasibility study. Feasibility study is a kind of pilot study where assessment of the practicality of a proposed plan or method is tested. Basically, concentrate any complication, any adverse event, duration of action, and all. This is what is studied in, understood, or devised or planned in a feasibility study. This is our feasibility study. This is recently under review. It's a very small case series, 10 groups, 10 patients in each group, which is still under review. I thought by today there would be some response, but I'm sorry, there's nothing. So it is still in review. A topical review is something where an article summarizes a recent finding in a highlight and highlights the issue in clinical research. Basically, it's not a systematic review or a review article. It is something, some new intervention, some new renal anesthesia technique where last 2 to 3 years they would gather the number of cases and try to comment on the complications, the duration of action. Maybe in cancer pain, they would like say the recurrence of cancer after that, or the development of chronic pain, etc. So this is something is called as a topical review. Propensity score matching. Basically, I would not go into very much detail because it is actually like a randomized control study only. But the thing is, it is retrospective. Now, as we understand, an RCT is a prospective, well-designed, adequately powered study where 2 to 3 groups are used with similar, possibly with similar demography, and a particular new intervention or a new technique is compared with the standard of care. Propensity score matching is a bit different in the sense you have a series of patients where, say, for example, in one hospital there are 2 clinicians or 2 anesthesiologists which have different way of doing, giving perioperative, postoperative anesthesia for total knee replacement. One does what is that, an IPAC block, and another does a femoral block. So now how to compare this? There is no randomization. So this is actually a bit complicated in the sense you have to gather all the data of the 2 patients, collect the demography and all, collect everything basically, VAS scores over 24, 48 hours, and then the cohorts has to be matched for comparison using a propensity score. It is very difficult for the anesthesiologist who does the basic statistics like me to do a propensity score. You need a trained biostatistician for this, but there are several studies. For example, the study by Adhikari et al. These are the people from Canada, and I was happy to see that it was published in an Indian journal of anesthesiology, clinical pharmacology. So they did a retrospective propensity score mass study. If you want to know what is a little bit details about propensity score matching, we have published a small letter to editor in Indian Journal of Palliative Care. You can go through later. Case reports. In all of the journals, if you see, it is written that case reports carry low priority, and most of the time, unless there is a new message, the case report gets rejected. So, what is important is it should be interesting, it should possibly be rare, it should have a unique anesthetic challenge, a key learning point, and possibly a new approach to the established clinical problem. So that is well. if you write with a case report, or you plan to write a case report after going through this checklist, maybe you could write well and you could get your paper accepted. So coming to certain new techniques, basically you can see our Hetal sir has published landmark anatomical landmark guided technique of performing erector spinae plane block. It was quite wonderful. I have seen his video also. So like he had shown it, and it appears so easy doing this. Similarly, he has also published about serratus anterior plane block using an anatomical landmark guided technique. So see, as you see, both blocks were described with use of ultrasound, and here Dr. Hetal takes the challenge a bit forward and does an anatomical landmark guide technique. Definitely, I mean, and he must have definitely shown the safety and the analgesic efficacy of those two particular blocks. Definitely, such kind of write-ups will get accepted in literature. Coming to my friend Dr. Ritesh Roy, he has described the rack approach to erector spinae plane block. So RACK is basically the name of the first name of all the four authors. But what they have done is, as you all know, erector spinae is done with the probe in paramedian position, and the injection is done cranial caudal. But what they do is they keep the probe transverse and do a lateral to medial injection, and they have published a series on that. They have described this technique. It is very easy, and definitely, and because of the way they have described and the way they have written, the paper got accepted. Similarly, in the recent edition of JOCP, Ritesh et al., they have published total post-operative analgesia for total knee arthroplasty using 4-in-1 block. I would ask everyone to go through it. People who do total knee arthroplasties and all, it is a wonderfully described technique, and as per his report, as per his data, it provides very good analgesia. Coming to Dr. Sunil Malik, we all know about the post-dura puncture headache. In this forum, we frequently describe about the bilateral penetrating ganglion block, and epidural bread patch is known to everyone as such. But there is another bilateral greater occipital nerve block. So what Dr. Malik has done is he combined the two, both the approaches, and he calls it as a dual block basically, where he does a bilateral sphenopalatine and a bilateral greater occipital nerve block. And he had displayed this poster in one of the ESPA Congress, and after that it was also published in one of the papers. So it's called as nerve and ganglion block. So nerve is the greater occipital nerve, and ganglion is the sphenopalatine ganglion block. So that's how you come across, you start doing something. I would request everyone to just write it. One of our very active members of this forum, Dr. Poonam, she has also come across, published one of the papers where they had used intrathecal clomidine to reduce shoulder hip pain in laparoscopy and the spinal anesthesia. This is also a very, I mean, anything, most of the time what I have seen is many people, many anesthesiologists, they have unique plans which you have never heard. But the plan is used in their practice, but it never, nowadays because of Facebook, they are either putting it, for example, Dr. Paliwal's thoracic spinal and all, it has become so popular all over the country. People are discussing it. Many of the anesthesiologists in Hyderabad have given his number. So something like this, if you are doing, if it comes in literature, it becomes a very big, I mean, it becomes a very good thing for people to read, understand, and to proceed subsequently. Similarly, one of my ex-colleagues, Dr. Sobhita, had published recently in Indian of anesthesia, thoracolumbar interfacial plane block for awake endoscopic laminectomy, and they have come out with wonderful results in this. So now from here, a little bit of papers from our side basically. So this was a correspondence written to one of the brief technical report or daring discourse in RAP, where we have written what the paper that we have addressed was diaphragm sparing nerve blocks for upper limb basically for shoulder surgery. So we had already, Dr. Devan had already published the erector spinae plane block for shoulder arthroscopy. So keeping that paper in mind, we have written this to RAPM, and it was published, and we were very happy to see in the month of May that Sui et al. Has also supported the paper, and he had mentioned the previous author who has written the brief technical report that yes, this could be done. This is a diaphragm sparing block, and it is definitely a way to look after in future. Now this is another paper by correspondence by again our Dr. Ritesh Roy in RAPM. So he has written total postoperative analgesia for hip surgeries using pen block with lateral femoral cutaneous nerve block. This is also quite a good way of dealing this. So don't go by the size of the paper. If you have anything in mind, just write it up as the journal requires, as per the journal requirement, and improve your curriculum vitae, improve your footprint, etc. That is what I want to see. So coming to images of interest are certain in certain journals like Turkish Journal of Anesthesia, Anesthesiology, Asian Journal of Anesthesiology. That is where they accept such kind of papers where you show them an image and describe the image in short, and if there is any brief anesthetic plan that you can describe. So there are a lot of, but only thing is here you have to be careful. You cannot not write it as an essay. The word limit, word count is up to 250 to 300 units. So it has to be to the point and very specific. So these are certain new approaches which have recently been published in Saudi Journal of Anesthesia. As you can see here, Dr. Diwan along with Dr. Blanco, the one who has described the text block and all. So he was also one of the authors in this paper, and this is another paper, articular and cutaneous nerve blocks at elbow. At Sancheti Hospital, Pune, Dr. Diwan has already started a randomized control trial comparing intraclavicular block and articular and cutaneous nerve block at elbow. So this is a cadaveric study basically. So this cadaveric study, what it shows it, there were two injections given on either side at the same level. One was a thoracic paravertebral and another was an erector splenic vein block. And the spread of the methylene blue dye was compared basically. So how far it goes, whether it goes to the epidural spread, whether it goes to the contralateral epidural spread. So what are the hemodynamic consequences of all? This is what was trying to be explained with this particular paper. So this is an upcoming paper as ahead of print paper where spread of local anesthetic after thoracic ESP and paravertebral block in patients with multiple rib fractures are described basically. It is a contrast study, CT contrast study. I would once again congratulate Dr. Santosh Sharma, Dr. Tuhin and Kala madam for coming out with this wonderful book. See, this is what I wanted to, like, it should be, it need not be your write-up, need not be a journal article. It could be a small book like this. The book was like it was sold like hot cakes. In fact, when the initial lot it just got over and people have to wait. In Hyderabad, I am talking about, people have to wait for 2 to 3 weeks. I had to contact him. What's happening was, why are we not getting this book? And later on it was delivered to each and every one. So this is also another way of just keeping yourself in the limelight and writing your experiences with good images, with good references, and helping the fraternity basically. This is what I want to say. Now everyone is struggling with facing this problem basically. The problem of COVID, people have stopped or rather reduced their work or are at risk, especially the senior members of our community, our parents, etc. But if you see like that, there is still many. What I remember is, till last week there were 19,000 odd papers related to COVID-19 which were published. There were guidelines from several societies. There were case report, case series from China, from Italy, from United States of America, in India also, Indian Palliative Care, Indian Association of Palliative Care, Indian Society of Anesthesiologists, Critical Care Medicine. All of them have come, and the literature is like flooding with COVID-19 basically. So we also thought, why not make hay while the sun shines? So this is a small communication, like we don't have any experience right now, but it is a suggestion kind of thing. Why not use bilateral greater occipital nerve block to treat post-dural consolidate in a COVID-19 positive patient? Because as we all know, if a patient is positive, he could have virions and all in the blood. So it is not a good idea to draw blood and inject into the neuraxis. We don't know the sequelae to that, and it sounds quite unethical. Doing a bilateral sphenopalatine ganglion block is making the patient cough, sneeze, and having virions everywhere. Droplets everywhere. So turn the patient prone or ask the patient to flex the head and do a greater occipital movement. It's easy. The efficacy has been proven already. And the second is with Aura team, Dr. Diwan and Dr. Vishal, along with them, this is a practical consultation for performing better work in suspected COVID patients. So this is yet to come. This is a head of print paper. Now coming to the write-up per se, when you plan to write, it should not be like elaborately written like a long question we write in our postgraduate or our undergraduate exam. You should know what you are writing and you should know the word count. It should be to the point. In the sense, usually if it is a case report, it is in the form of introduction, case discussion, the case report per se, and the discussion. So introduction should just highlight what you are talking about, what you want to say. Case description should mention what you have done in very brief and use the discussion part to highlight, emphasize, and compare with the previous paper that has been published. Instruction for each journal is different, so that is very important. If you have sent to one of the journals and it has got rejected, you cannot send the same write-up to another journal because they might be having different instructions, they might be having different word count, number of references, images could be different. The way of citing a reference will be different. In many journals, it is as a superscript. In many journals, it is as a continuation in boxes. In many journals, it is superscript without boxes. So you should be knowing all that and then only submit. Discussion is the most important part, and most of the word count, say around 70% of or 60% of word count, should be reserved for discussion. Images should be good quality, it should be well labeled, and the legend should be legible and very clear. Many people say case reports are low priority and all. Doesn't matter. You are sharing your experience with your fraternity, with your colleagues, and you want to come out as like you have done a write up and all. So what sense of priority and all makes it doesn't make any sense. Uh, Coming to letter to editor. Now, as I was telling, most of the articles, case reports are accepted as letter to editor. So in that case, the range is like say from 500 to 1000 words, depending on the journal. Having said that, it is still peer reviewed. You could still have a rejection in that. Most of the letter to editor are indexed in PubMed ID and PubMed Central ID, except Anesthesia Lab in British Journal of Anesthesia. They accept it, they publish it online, but you don't get a PM ID for it. Okay. Now coming to letter to editor, if you have been following Dr. Blanco and his text blog, so it was actually published as a letter to editor in Anesthesia in 2012. And can you imagine, till date, this is 3 days back, he had 343 citations for that letter. So anybody who does a breast surgery, whatever they use a SAP, ESP and all, they have to mention perioperative analgesia, existing modalities, and the reference definitely comes into picture. So this is what I am talking about. It doesn't matter about the priority or not. It should be unique. It should be in a good journal, and if it is cited, you have hit the bullseye. So this is one of our papers that was published in Indian Journal of Anesthesia, where we saw accessory pectoral muscles while doing a modified radical mastectomy. So we did a small write-up on what are the implications if we plan to do a pectoralis blocks in this patient. Later on, we have published a case series where we did an opioid-free mastectomy along with electrospinal pain. It was a series of 5 cases, which has been like cited for around in around 10 papers till date. This is a small letter to editor, like describing the complexity of cutaneous innervation during mastectomy. So this was actually I had published. Made a poster on this topic basically and presented to either in one of the conferences, and then later on one fine day I thought all the societies have different recommendations for newer anticoagulants, so why not do a write-up, and I was happy to see that it was accepted in the Indian Journal of Anesthesia, and that's the table that was described in that paper. So a very small case report had written some 6 years back. It was regarding a patient with an acute abducen nerve palsy for lower segment cesarean section. So there were otherwise no contraindication for cesarean section, but because of a long cranial nerve, which after a spinal anesthetic could further aggravate. So we planned a general anesthesia for this patient and got the paper published. And it was surprising to see that that paper was commented. There was a reference to that paper in renal anesthesia and pain medicine in 2017. So I actually returned back to RFP. So it feels good when you have worked hard on a very small thing and people have noticed it and cited it, and you have also got the opportunity to write on that. So that's my way of looking at it. Maybe others might have a different perspective towards it. Coming to you have done the extensive detailed write up, use all the latest references. Now the paper goes for peer review. So this is I mean in the initial phases of your submissions and all, this usually happens because maybe sometimes there is again a problem of lack of training possible. Uh, so this is the cycle basically. It goes to the editor, editorial assistant, then to the section editor, then it comes back if there are any discrepancies, or it gets rejected. If it comes back, that doesn't mean that they have asked for change. It doesn't mean that after changes it will get accepted. But there is a fair amount of, if you do the corrections well and resubmit it, definitely there is a fair amount of chance that it will get accepted. So when we talk about the deficiencies, when you talk about an original article or a randomized control trial, most important is what the editor reads in the beginning is methodology. Your methodology should be foolproof and it should there should be no loopholes in that. But as I said in the beginning, I won't be talking about RCTs and all that. So when we are talking about other type of communication, so what is important? What is important is the significance of that writer, the writing style, the literature review, and the conclusions and all that you draw. So these are the other things which are important when you are not writing an RCTs. So ICJME, International Committee of Medical Journal Editors, their statement is very important, especially when the authors and all are finalized. Basically, you have done an extensive write-up. Now you want to include a couple of people, so you have to follow a particular recommendation given by ICJME. What happens in medical colleges and hospitals, we all know. There is something called as ghost authorship. There is something called as gift authorship. There is something called as guest authorship. I would not discuss it in detail, but a ghost author is, sorry to say that, but somebody who has least contributed to this. It could be one of the surgeons who has just done the case, and somebody says his name should come. Gift authorship could be your unit in charge, could be your head of the department, or could be one of the senior colleagues. Guest authorship is somebody who you invite, who you find, that this person, although he has not been involved in the case as such, but his expertise is needed. So that is a guest authorship, and a guest authorship usually has some contribution to a particular paper. So now why I am showing you this slide is, if you see over here, there's a paper on Favipiravir which has been recently released in India like a big budget Bollywood movie. And if you see, read this paper, there are 80 patients recruited in this particular study. And you have any idea how many authors are there? There are 28 authors for an 80 patient data. So approximately 2.5 to 3 researchers involved in them. So this is again a clear-cut example of ghost authorship or gift authorship. So coming to the writing part, writing a manuscript is a tough task. It is a bit difficult or impossible alone unless you have divided the work. Like if you have colleagues, if you have junior colleagues or senior colleagues, you ask somebody to gather references, ask somebody to label the images, and somebody does the writer, if that is possible. But people who are practicing alone, freelancing practice and all, and they also want to contribute. So in that case, there is no choice. They have to do it alone. It is extremely time consuming. I always tell my colleagues that for writing 600, 700 word letter to editor, it doesn't happen in an hour or two. It takes a lot of time. You have to gather references. It has to be cited properly in the as per the journal newspaper. It's not an easy thing. It needs motivation basically. Motivation in the sense you should, that it should come from inside. That yes, I have to. This is new. This needs to be told. This story needs to be told. Unless that thing comes, I know many of my friends who sometimes talk about a case done 2 years back which was taken for writing but then stopped. So, in my opinion, the ideal time frame of writing a new experience or exciting experience is 1 week. If that period of 1 week crosses, the motivation goes off, the interest goes off, and you lose most of the information. You must have written it somewhere, typed it somewhere, taken images somewhere. Subsequently, it will get faded and it will never come in. And another problem is, as there are no monetary gains involved, especially in our country, outside abroad people they get grants and all these things. So, but here there's unfortunately there's nothing like that. So that also prohibits somebody to do a write-up. Originality of a particular write-up is very important. As we all know, plagiarism is nothing but theft of words. So there are like if you have taken something from a already published write-up, you should give credit to that. At times there are certain images which you can't have, you want it in your paper, so you have to go through the copyright page and take proper permission. Most of the time 70% times the permission, like you need to pay for that particular permission. What you can do in that case is write to the author, and if they are willing, I mean if the copyright is still with them, they could give you permission. And as far as possible avoid self plagiarism. So these are the like various grades of plagiarism basically. Insufficient acknowledgement, and the severe most is the direct, where you have lifted word to word and then put it in the. It is like in simple word, it is called copy and paste. So having said that, there are a lot of plagiarism checkers available. Small SEO tools is what most of the journals they use. It is free at a given moment. Small SEO tools gives you a plagiarism check of 1,000 words. So if your article write up is more than 1,000 words, you have to do it twice, and it gives you a report also how much percentage of plagiarism is there. But the high end journals, for example, anesthesiology, DJ, RAPM, and all, they use Authenticate. Authenticate is costly. Most of the time, the publisher and all they buy it. They have a license for that. And another is plagiarism checker. Again, it is like I think only 500 words is what you can use in plagiarism checker. Another important one is Turnitin. So when you select the journal, there are a lot of things that you should see. Time to publication, if at all it is accepted. Frequency of publication, as you can see, there are many journals which is like twice yearly. You submit it now, it goes into review, and it is coming next year. So you might get disappointed. You might not do anything. But if you select a journal where it is like a quarterly or a monthly journal like IJ, where it comes every month, and once you accept it, it comes in 3 months. It gives you a kick, it gives you a motivation to write again. Open access is like you can submit it and everything is processed free. You should know the audience, like as I was telling, regional anesthesia journal, you write it in a in a perioperative medicine or a regional anesthesia journal, not in an obstetric or orthopedic journal. Impact factor is something which I don't personally favor much, because I mean there are a lot of issues with that basically. So recently, Bala Venkat sir had shared this particular impact factor of RAPM in most of the groups and to individuals also. Like that is how it started for RAPM 2.12 in 2013. Now it is very high. It is the second highest impact factor in any of the 33 or 34 anesthesia journals which are available, which are declared by Clarivate Analytics. So what is important is impact factor. Maybe you could think about that. Specialty journal is very important. Acceptance rate for year, which is given in the website of all journals. Manuscript processing fee. So there are certain journals. I will talk about it later in this slide. Basically, there are two types of open access. One is a green open access, and another is a gold open access. In gold open access, you submit the article. If it is accepted, then you pay a publication fee. It is usually done in most of the European countries where the administration or the university pays for that. If it is converted into rupees, it comes to a very high cost of around 25 to 30,000 times. But there is another option. What they don't mention is, and what we don't read properly is green open access. What green open access means they would not charge you anything, but for 1 year there will be an embargo period. Embargo period is like you can share amongst your colleague, but you cannot post it in social media or LinkedIn or Facebook at all. Because for this 1 year, if anybody wants to read, either they have purchased it and read, or if they are a subscriber of that particular journal or that particular publication, only they have access to that. So that is their way of earning money. So this is what we should understand. This is most of the times in BMJ, British Medical Journals, and Elsevier journals. So you have to read the author instructions very carefully. So these are the journals available in Asian subcontinent. Indian Journal of Anesthesia, JOSCP, Anesthesia Assistant Researches. I would tell you again, this is a unique type of publication system where when you submit the journal, you have to pay, and when it gets accepted, you have to pay. If it gets rejected, the submission money doesn't come back; it goes to the publication company. Indian Journal of Critical Care Medicine also doesn't charge, and Journal of Anesthesia and Critical Care Reports, of course, Dr. Pallavi Lande is the chief editor. Even that is one of the journals where all of the perioperative care articles can be published. So this is a small table. I will not elaborate it. I think I am already passing significant amount of time. This is a slide where you will see I have categorized it as per the name of the journal, category of manuscript, and the number of words which are allowed by that particular journal. So knowing keywords, putting keywords is very important. What most of the journal ask you is to have the keywords in terms of mesh terms. Mesh is nothing but medical subject heading. So there is a mesh browser. You can open it in Google and put your keyword in that, and how it displays after the search. You have to put it like anesthesia will come as ANESTHESI. So you should write it like that only, or renal anesthesia, whatever it is written. Ultrasonography will be there, ultrasound will not be there. So whatever comes in the mesh browser, you have to strictly write that. So coming to references, most of the times we go by the Vancouver style. Vancouver style means how the site starts citing in a particular article. And Harvard is nothing but in the alphabetical order of the system. So we follow, in most of the journals they follow Vancouver style. Figure legends has to come at the end. Conflict of interest statement depends. Many times you have to sign it and upload it. Otherwise, you can just mention in the title page basically. Whether it was previously presented somewhere, in the sense as a poster or as a thesis and all, that has also to be mentioned in the title page or first page. So these are reference managers. If you are aware of this, Z is Zotero, which I use for my write-ups. Mendeley is by Scopus, and EndNote is by Thomas Reuters. So it is like what I tell my friends is like Z is like Android Play Store because it is free, and EndNote is like iPhone because it is paid. But all are good, all are equally good, all are equally easy. Once you start using these reference managers, your managing references becomes very easy, especially if you are using more than 10 references. If it is less than 5, it doesn't matter, you need not use it basically. You can see videos on YouTube how to use reference manager. It is very easy and it is very helpful. So this is how every journal has a unique way of writing citations. Some journals they say first 3 authors and et al. Some journals they say first 6 authors and et al. Some journals they want the name of the journal in italics. Some journals they want volume number and issue number. As you can see over here, this is the volume number and issue number. Most of the Indian journals they don't want the issue number. If you write it and send it, they'll send you back. It will just add up to the time. So what I want to say is read the instructions very carefully and then submit. Don't be in a hurry. Today you have done something, tomorrow submission. No. If you have couple of co-authors, circulate it amongst everyone and then submit it. Because for these technical things, if the paper comes back, then it suffers significant time frame for publication. So these are the technical difficulties which I am sure most of the members of this group who frequently do writing they face. There are problems with writers. They are either busy or there is no help from colleagues. They don't enjoy writing. They don't think their writing and publishing or submitting is going to help. But I totally disagree with this. Most of them they do not take the trouble that the written material is good reading material. If they feel it is good, they should circulate it amongst peers or colleagues or a junior colleague basically who can just go through it, find the grammatical mistakes and maybe help in enhancing the particular paper. What everyone should know is what every writer should know. Readers and writers are different. Readers want it a bit more crispy and more to the point. Writers, somebody could keep go on writing, but it will just cross the word count significantly and end up with rejection basically. Another potential problem why most of the authors, most of the writers who want to write but suddenly stop writing is because of the rejection. Because sometimes a reviewer is not expected to be harsh. If you go to the Publon's site, they have a small course in that where they tell you how to do a point-to-point review of a particular article in various categories. So it is very specifically told that you should not be harsh, you should not like say a terribly written article, poor grammar also. These are not the way it is considered unethical and it is not considered right. But having said that, many reviewers they do that. So this totally demoralizes a particular upcoming researcher basically, and they don't pursue that writing and they don't encourage their subsequent subordinate or a junior or upcoming consultant to write. So what I these are very common remarks that is seen basically. This is an interesting and unusual case. However, it does not add significantly to our knowledge. Basically, this can come if you have not done a thorough review of literature before, right? But this is what again most of the times come. You think you have done a good write up, but the author, the editor, or the reviewer feels this is neither a systematic or state of art comprehensive review of the subject. Authors do not cite their own experiences or work. So fair enough. There are a lot of options, or maybe you need to rethink whether what you are written is really worth publishing. Or not. So once article gets rejected and you want to send it again, circulate amongst colleagues, friends, teachers, or somebody who is directly or indirectly known to you, who is a regular publisher, not publisher in the sense who keeps publishing in that particular or related journals. Maybe their insights might help you. So coming to this, one of the last slides, basically this is what during I used my lockdown period in doing this good clinical practice course. I had shared this link to Dr. Hetar sir also, and I have asked him to do this course. It is valid for 3 years, and it will tell you the importance of ethics basically in the research. How review board is important, consent is important, quality assurance, protocol, documentation, etc. It is very good. It takes some 5 to 6 hours. There is no time limit. You can use 1 week to two sessions you can do per day. There is a quiz at the end, and later on you get this very good looking certificate which you can do a color printout and frame it or maybe share in social media. So it is really wonderful. I recommend everyone to do this course. And I hope even at the end of this session, if one of the listener, if any, I have motivated them. I feel the last 16 minutes that I have used to continuously show some 67 slides, it has been successful. Thanks a lot.
Hello. Thank you, Dr.
Yeah.
Abhijit, for wonderful presentation. It was very comprehensive, starting from the idea of writing to the how to deal with the rejections. Right? And I'm hopeful that you will be available to all the group members to guide them for their publications.
Definitely.
Thank you.
Definitely.
Thank you. Thank you very much.
Yeah. Thanks a lot for patient listening, everyone. Thanks a lot.
Yeah. Have a nice weekend ahead.
Thank you. Same to you.